So last class, we were talking about graphing a rational function. So if we look at a graph here, the basic rational function was looking like this, where we had a curve that didn't meet or cross the y or the x-axis. And the same thing was mirrored in this corner right here. So this is the basic rational function. Now, of course, we're going to be mostly working with the transformed rational function. So the form is basically this. You have your a, then you have a b, and then your x minus h underneath the fraction, and then your k is completely separate. So you have your asymptotes at h and k, and you would draw that h asymptote on x-axis. So you would mark it on your x-axis, and then the k would be you draw it on the y-axis. So let's do an example. So we have this function here. And let's say that it is -1 over x plus 1 minus 2. So first thing that you want to do is identify what your h and what your k is. So remember, your h, you always take the opposite of the sign that's in front. So because this is positive, our h is going to become -1. And then for the k, you just take it as is. It'll be -2. So let's go ahead and draw those onto our graph here. So at -1, we mark off on the x-axis, and then we just draw in that dotted line. And then we mark off our k, which was -2, on the y-axis. And then we just draw in that dotted line. So we now know where our asymptotes are. So now what we want to do is we want to make a table of values. We want to choose two x values. So if we look back at our graph, let's choose two x values on the x-axis here. I'm going to choose x is 0 and x is -2. So I just circled those 2 points as my reference. That's what I'm going to focus on. So I'm going to do 0 and -2. Now, to find my y value, I'm going to take my x and plug it into the formula up here. So f of x is equal to -1 over 0 plus 1 minus 2. This becomes -1 over +1, because 0 plus 1 is 1, minus 2. -1 divided by +1 gives me -1. And then -1 minus 2 gives me a total of -3. So that's my first point right there. Now the second one, let's just quickly calculate that as well. -1, and then we put in -2 plus 1 minus 2. So this will become -1. -2 plus 1 is going to give us -1. Negative 1 divided by negative 1 will give us positive 1. 1 minus 2 will give us a value of negative 1. So we now have our 2 points. Now let's go ahead and graph it. So I'm going to just switch the color so that you can see the graph a little bit better. When we had it at 0, it was negative 3 on the y. So our first point is going to be here. And when we put in negative 2, our first point on the y was a negative 1. So you mark those 2 points, make them nice and clear. And now what you want to do is you want to draw in that curve. So let's try that again. Draw in that curve. The curve will have to pass through, has to pass through this point here that you've drawn. So this is just an approximation. So, not perfect, but it should look similar to this. It should be approaching both of the asymptotes. It shouldn't touch. I know here it touches a little bit. It shouldn't. This is an approximation. And then that is how you would graph the irrational function.